Well, hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, we've got part 6 of our Toys and Joys 1948 Woodie Wagon build. Well, when we left last week's show, we had just glued up the parts for the rear fender assemblies. That way we could get all of the panel overlays done at the back end of the vehicle. So the first thing we're going to do today is we're going to look at shaping those fenders and getting them finalized first. Well, our glue ups are dry, and the first thing that we need to do is we need to shape these. But before we can do that, we have to do a little bit of prep. The reason for that is, as we already know, we've got a 4-degree taper at the back end of these fenders. So if we sit this like this, although it looks like it's pretty flush, it's actually not. And that's going to cause us some problems when we go to shape it. So out of some scrap pine, I have cut some 4-degree wedges, and the end here is 7/32 of an inch thick. We know that to be the height that this taper starts at. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to double side tape these to the back end of each one of our fenders. And once we get that done, then everything here now is square. It's flush. It's the way it should be. This piece here will be flush to our sanding table, and that will make all of our sanding from there right. It's not going to change the angles. So once I get this done, guys, again, just like the original fenders, the front fenders, I cannot tell you how to shape this. This, for me, is all freehand sanding. We can see here on the intersection of the rear fender, we have a 5/8 radius here, but yet on the outside fender, it really tapers into that 5/8 radius. On the front end of the inner fender, there's hardly any radius at all, but yet on the outer fender at the front, there is quite a sharp radius here, as well as, looking from the front, quite the radius on the outside edge. So for me, this is all freehand sanding. I'm going to be doing it over at the belt sander, and then once the belt sanding is done and I get the initial shaping, that's when all the hand sanding comes into play. The one thing I'm going to caution you about, guys, is do not change your profile here at the back. That sharp, crisp line that we have there, do not alter that. That is very important for when we do the trim of the body panel. So I'm going to get these shaped up, and then I'm going to show you what they look like once they're done. All right, and if you take your time, you should end up with something that looks like these. And of course, if we take one of our panels, this will eventually sit here on our panel just like that. And you can see how great that's going to look once we get that done. But now we need this trim that's around here. And for some reason, and I don't know what that reason is, Toys and Joys has decided to make this fender frame, I guess we'll call it, all in separate pieces. I want to do something different. I think that is nothing but a headache. So let me show you what I have in mind. I have photocopied our pattern, which is this whole assembly, our separate pieces, 1, 2, 3, 4 separate pieces. I've taken the pattern and I have placed it on a piece of hardboard, making sure that I allowed for this height here, this 7/32 of an inch from the base of our panel up to where our 4-degree taper starts. Guys, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this over to the scroll saw and I'm going to cut it around the outside perimeter, right across this line and right down this line here. And then I'll show you what to do from that point. And what we end up with is this. Now, guys, we want to do this all in one shot. So I have some 3/16 inch thick poplar that I've milled out here, and I'm going to place it up against our straight edge, place our template here up against our straight edge, and we're going to trace this around. Oh, I see I have not sanded that one edge. I'm going to do that first. So we're going to trace all the way around here after I sand that up, and we're going to cut one of these each for both our left, and then we'll flip this over, and our right fenders. Okay, and there we go. And I have labeled these both as D side for driver's side or P side for passenger side. I don't really like saying left or right because depending on which way you're looking at the model, that can change. So the first thing we're going to do, keep this intact, and we're going to take it over to the router table and using that 45-degree chamfer bit along this flat surface and then all the way around the perimeter up until this point on both of our pieces, we're going to put that 45-degree chamfer. Okay, and with that chamfer done, we now need to trace the profile of our fenders, and this now will become the inside of our trim. So you want to make sure that you've got this line here at 7/32 of an inch up from the bottom edge, because we squared this off if you remember. So we're going to line this up on the edge, line that corner right here of our fender. We're going to line that up with our 7/32 line from the bottom. We're going to center it left to right. We're going to take our time, and once we get that done, we're going to trace the outer perimeter of our fender. And there is the profile of our fenders marked. Now guys, I feel like I may have misled you a little bit here. I said that we need the mark 7/32 up from the bottom, and that is sort of true, except that's not how it works with this, because here on the drawing, we can see here, I forgot about our running board, and our fenders actually get mounted flush with the bottom of our running board, which means that our fender needs to be down 1/8 of an inch. So you put the mark on this side for that 4-degree taper at 3/32 of an inch, and this side of our fender, the thinner side, is actually going to hang down below it by 1/8 of an inch. And then you end up with something like this, and you can trace around it. And then we get our trim, our 3/16 trim all the way around. So there's still a little more to do with this. And the next thing we do actually is I need to take this over to the table saw. Well, at this point, I need to transfer some lines onto my piece. And we can see here on the drawing, guys, as I've said before many times, these are your drawings. Don't be afraid to mark them up and add notes. So for this piece up here, I have extended its outer lines all the way down to the bottom and taken some measurements, and I have transferred those lines onto one of my blanks. Guys, all I'm going to do here is I'm going to set the stop on my fence, and I want to cut out, because we have this square edge here, we can still do it. We haven't cut our taper. So I want to cut out this middle section. You just want to make sure that your table saw blade is on the right side of the cut so that we get the right size here. And effectively what that will do is it will take out this middle piece here so that we can add our upright into this curve. So I'm going to take this over, set my stops, and get these ones cut. Well, hopefully you noticed that when cutting the spaces here for the uprights, I did not cut them right through, and there's a reason for that. So what I've done is I have milled the stock 1/2 inch wide. I've made it extra long. This is for the uprights that are just at the back of the rear doors. You can see them here on the drawing. So what we're going to do is I've done that 1/16 routing in the middle to give that illusion that it's more than one piece. And with these slots now, I'm going to glue these in place just like that. We're going to glue them in place, and we are going to let that completely set up and do nothing else with it until those are dry. And once these pieces are dry, I have used my fenders to line them up again and trace around the outside to get that perfect profile here right across that upright piece. Guys, it's just a matter now of taking this over to the scroll saw. We're going to very carefully follow along that line. If you're not confident in your ability at the scroll saw, no problem. cut just slightly outside the line and use an oscillating drum sander to really perfect that fit. We're going to do the same on both, and then that there will almost be it for these pieces here, these trim pieces. And once your glue is dry, you can just trim this off here. I trimmed it off just at the scroll saw, and then I used my little sanding block up against the frame, slowly back and forth just to sand it flush with our existing maple frame there. So we're waiting on our other piece to dry, but guys, we can now move on to the other parts that will be in between here on our back door. These top ones, both here and along this back section here of the rear of the vehicle, are no big deal. But these ones here are shaped to that same trim. So what we can do, and hopefully it's going to work, I'm going to do it with some test pieces first, but we have our template still. So as long as we have our template, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark it where the piece should be. I'll hold it up to my template. I'll trace along the edge to get my profile. I'm going to cut that, and then I'm going to fit it in here to make sure that it fits, and then we'll cut it to length and glue them in place. So we don't need a video of that kind of thing. We've done it all through the build. We're going to get all of these horizontal pieces installed on both the back door and the rear compartment of the vehicle, and I'll see you when all of that is done. Guys, if you're doing the router method where you're doing these little 1/16 wide routings, just make sure you add them on the pieces so that you have continuity between all of these horizontal pieces of stock. All right, so that method seems to work. It doesn't get it perfect by any means, but it sure does get it awfully close, and then I just had to give it a little bit of a sanding. So there you go. There's my test piece. Worked out just fine, and I guess now I'll carry on and do all the rest of them in the exact same way. Okay, and it doesn't take long before you get all of these pieces cut and fit into place. Guys, that method of using the template to mark this curve here worked amazingly well. I was able to cut these with absolutely no sanding to fit, just careful cuts on the scroll saw using the template that we made to make this section here. Okay, so we have these pieces done. It's all careful glue ups, but I want to make one little correction. Earlier, I said that I was not going to glue in the windowsills because they would protrude, and that would be the case if the drawing showed the entire thickness of the panel, but what I was going by was this little detail here, and that little detail actually is just these trim pieces that we're cutting right now, which is only 3/16 of an inch thick. So actually, that windowsill does not protrude. It actually sits a little bit shy because we have 3/16 on our trim and then a 1/4 inch thick for our panel. The entire thickness of our windowsills is 3/8 of an inch. So there's actually it's raised up on the inside a 1/16 of an inch because it sits flush with our outer trim here. So sorry about that, but you know what? Anybody can misinterpret plans once in a while. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to make these pieces right here, which would be the top sill over the back window, and as well this back panel piece. Now guys, this might be or can be a bit of a tricky piece here, but what we're going to do is just like we did in the other pieces, I've made a photocopy of the pattern, and we are going to cut this using a template. Simple as that. We're going to use our template. We're going to mark it out, make sure that our template fits well with our model, and then we will make left and right sides for these, dry fit them in place, and once we're happy with it, we will glue them in place. Now guys, right here, this top 3/16 trim, I have actually cut this to be just a little bit proud of each one of these profiles because I want to sand afterwards to get that fine fitting. I already have a bit of an issue here. I noticed something shifted and this here doesn't line up perfectly. So let's get these top trim pieces made for the back end of our Woodie Wagon, and then I'll show you what it looks like when we get that done. Okay, and those are those pieces cut. Now, I did point out here how I had that discrepancy, something shifted. So all I've done to compensate for that is I have extended the inside of that piece. I don't know if you can see that. There, it'll go like that, and that'll fill in that gap where something slid. And it doesn't change anything in the model because the outside is still the same. So I've also, you may notice here, I have also left this piece extra long. And what we're going to do is after it's glued in place and the glue is completely cured, we're going to get in there, extend this angle, this 4-degree angle out the back, and sand everything there flush along that 4 degrees. Well, I'm going to finish trimming this up, and once we get that in place and everything is set and we're happy with it, we can now glue in our window sills. Now guys, remember I made the mistake of thinking that they actually stuck out the back end. So you're going to mount them so that they're flush with your 3/16 inch thick trim on your door. So you may have to trim it just a little bit, just due to the fact that you're adding extra pieces. Some pieces may not fit perfectly anymore, like this one. This one's a little off now, but that's okay, that happens. So we're going to get all of these window sills glued in place, and then we can move on from there. Well, the next pieces that I want to make will be this wagon floor and the cab front panel. Guys, I don't think we need a video of the wagon floor. I've just milled some 1/2 inch thick cherry, and I have cut it to be 4 1/4 wide and 5 1/4 long, just like it states in the plans. But for this cab front panel, it is the same dimension, 4 1/4 inches wide, 2 1/8 inches long, but it has this hole here, this angled hole. And we can see here that it says that the hole is 140 degrees. So whether you measure it or whether you do the math, that turns out to be tilting your drill press at 40 degrees. But guys, what if you don't want to tilt your drill press? So what I've done is I have my cherry here. I've marked and center punched our hole right here where it states on the plans. And I have cut this piece of scrap pine at 40 degrees. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to use some double-sided tape. I'm going to place this right here. Make sure that it's nice and secure. Double-side tape to this 40-degree angle. And you can see I've marked here on the side which way our hole has to go. And I'm just going to drill this hole over at the drill press using a 5/16 diameter center point bit. Well, I didn't quite have a good enough hold on that piece, and I did get the bit to bite a little bit and do a little bit of damage, but I was able to sand it out, and I almost drilled it on the wrong side, so I caught that when double checking. So I want to now glue in our cab front panel, and I want to glue in our wagon floor. And if we look here at the drawing, we can see that the cab front panel is mounted flush with the front end of both of our side panels. We can also see that here our wagon floor is at the very back of our side panel. It looks like it is even, but nowhere, and I mean nowhere else in the drawing does it show those two panels and where they go. So I'm going to go on some assumptions here. If we look at the general views drawing, we can see that our front side panel, our hood, the bottom of our fenders lines up with the side of our side panels. And that lines up, when we sit that here on our model, it lines up with the bottom of our chassis. So that would mean that if our side panels line up with our bottom of our fenders and our hood assembly, and the hood assembly lines up with the bottom of our chassis, that would also mean that the side panels also have to align with this bottom of our chassis. But it doesn't state that anywhere. I'm also under the assumption that this front panel here, this gap that we see right here from the bottom of our side panels up to the bottom of our cab front panel, I am under the impression and the assumption that that is the same thickness as what our chassis is, and that that 1/2 inch panel actually slides right in here, right between this piece that we put in and the 1/2 inch gap that we put in for this front chassis. So you can do the measurements, you can play around all you want. I've already done the measurements, so I'll just tell you. From the flat surface here at the bottom, which will be the bottom of the running boards if you've already installed those, it is 1.25 inches up for this back panel here to get mounted. That will be 1.25 inches up, will be the bottom of this panel, and it will get glued in place so that it is flush with these back curves of our rear profile. The front piece here, our front cab panel, this is going to get raised up 3/4 inch and glued in flush with the front edge of both of our side panels. Now guys, I'm going to give you a bit of advice here, and that advice would be, while this thing is clamped together and nothing is set yet, once before that glue gets a chance to really set into that stock, you really, really, really want to check it for square. Make sure that everything across the front here is square. Make sure everything is lining up the way you want it. Because once you get this glued together, you don't get a second chance. So I'm going to glue this together, and then we'll do a dry fit of our model and see where we're at this point. And now there's not too much that we can do with this until it fully dries. Guys, I went through about 3 or more dry fits before I was happy with the way this was going together. And even then, you want to get somebody to help you if you can. My wife came out and helped me with this glue up. It wants to tilt back onto the back fenders. So you need to be able to hold it here in place, as well as get your back section here, your wagon floor, aligned with the back edge of each one of your side panels. But then you've got this front cab panel here that has to be elevated 3/4 inch off the floor, but then flush with the front, making sure that everything is square. It is a nightmare of a glue up, guys. So if you can, get yourself some help to put this together. And of course, once it's all said and done, and once this is dry, we can do a dry fit of our model and just see how it's fitting together at this point. And unfortunately, once again, that is all the time that we have for this week. And once again, we've made some really great progress. Guys, those trim pieces on the side panels, they are, I would say, one of the most tedious things that I think I've ever made from Toys and Joys. They're not impossible. They're not necessarily difficult. You just need to come up with a procedure that works for you and one that makes it a little easier. Now, for me, that would happen to be templates, and I use them to mark the edges to at least get me close. And because the cutting was accurate, as far as on the scroll saw, sanding up to the line, what have you, that was a perfect method. It worked out very well. But either way, you just need to figure out a method that works for you. The methods I show you here on this program are not written in stone. And if there's something that you think will work better for your situation or for your tools or your shop setup, any of that stuff, feel free to change them all, guys. I'm not an expert when it comes to model building. I've just been doing it a long time, and I have fun with it. And I have a few little tricks along the way that I use in order to get things to work. So if you have your own methods, by all means, use them. Guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, or if you found any part of today's show entertaining, useful, or whatever, if you enjoyed it, why not like and subscribe to the channel? Guys, we have an amazing audience base here, and I'm hoping that you're going to consider becoming a part of it. Once again, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed the content. I hope you were able to pull something positive away from today's show. I hope that you were able to pick up a couple little hints for your model building, maybe a couple little techniques. But more importantly, I hope that you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another woodworking video.